Hello. I'm here, and Kenya is going to join me shortly, hopefully. This is Black Herstory, and we come here every Thursday evening at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then all the other standards of time that happen centrally and on the eastern side of the country. And this evening, Kenya is navigating through a minor health issue, minor discomfort. So hopefully she'll be able to join us in a little bit, but I'm going to get us started. It's interesting being here by myself. I'm like, oh, hello world. I I do come on YouTube a couple of times a week, this Thursdays, and then now I have a show with my dad on Saturdays, and it's different when you jump on a live by yourself. It's kind of like doing lives on social media where it can often feel like you're talking into a void a little bit because you don't know if anybody's out there listening. So hopefully there are some people out there listening and or watching. So if you are seeing this live, you're welcome to participate by leaving comments in the chat. I'll be taking a look at them. And before we go any further, I will just introduce myself. I feel like most people who are tuning in know me and know my co host, Kenya. However, for those who don't, my name is KEISEAN Rains, and I'm the Calm Coach. I am coming to you live out of Long Beach, California. As a business owner, I work as a consultant, as a wellness advocate, and also as a certified peer support specialist. And Kenya was actually someone I connected with through this app called Clubhouse during quarantine. And we connected through there. We hosted some conversations together there. And then she became one of my clients for business coaching. And then we are circling back and doing this thing together now. So it's been a cool journey. And I'm really grateful for the chance to be able to connect with her. This particular show that we bring here weekly is unique. And I say that because it is a conversation between two Black women of a certain age, meaning over 40, who through just our lived experiences and perspectives and points of view are able to talk about some things that I think really are worth discussing. Each topic that we share is intentionally selected because of its relevance to Black women. And this week's topic is no different. Usually, what we do before we dive into our conversation is share a hot topic. I haven't really tapped into the news a whole lot this week. However, there was an event that took place this week called the WWDC, which is the Worldwide Developers Conference, and it's hosted by Apple. And it takes place every year. And it is a conference specifically that attracts developers. So folks who build apps and build software and contribute to the development of technology, that's who's typically invited there, along with Apple employees. And I used to be one of those back in the day. So every June, roughly, there's this conference. And what happens at this conference also is Apple hosts a keynote on the very first day where they talk about new hardware and software that are going to be released to the general public. So this year's big announcement is a piece of technology which I personally am super excited about. It is one of the first pieces of what they call quantum computers or spatial computers, also known as AR or augmented reality computers, known as the Vision Pro, which is a wearable computer. And it's going to be pretty amazing for those of you who love tech like I do. So the Vision Pro is coming out. So that's the hot topic, the big piece of news that I have to share that I learned this week. And so there's our hot topic for the week. This is really a trip doing this by myself. So anywho, I'm going to take a sip of water for a second. I'm going to do that periodically. Have to hydrate. So there she is. Yay. Oh, wait, I think you're muted just a little bit. Not muted a little bit, but muted a lot of bit.
I'm muted. I'm sorry.
There you are. Hello. How are you feeling?
It's a little dimmer where I'm at because,
Okay.
yeah, but I am here and yes, I'm fine. I get what's called an eye migraine and one popped up, but it's resolving. So,
good. I'm good.
yeah.
Glad to hear that. Yeah, I was like, well, I'm like, I can wing it. I can do this. it's just, it's different vibes when we're like, here together. So I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what's so weird. I don't feel bad when I have them. I just can't see.
Let's see. Okay.
So
Yeah.
that would be hard.
Kind of uncomfortable. Yeah. I mean, especially when you think about it, like anytime that one of our senses that, exist as part of a normative body, which is a language that I learned this week,
Wait,
anytime
repeat
what
that. You said a
normative body. So I was in a workshop this week. Part of what I do is, I get to participate in lots of different workshops, specifically in the DEI space. And this was a workshop this week that was centered around creating ability specifically for the disabled community. And part of what we did as a workshop was go through this a self-assessment for a normative body. And we kind of like checked off things that are working as they are meant to work in our bodies. And they talked about vision, hearing, taste, touch, smell. And it was interesting because, anytime if we're having like a health issue or not feeling well for some reason, and one of our five senses isn't like working properly, it was giving us a chance to kind of relate to what those who don't have quote unquote normative bodies, what they deal with all the time, whether it's a
yeah,
vision issue or a hearing issue and that kind of thing. So yeah,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Yeah, it throws you off when you can't see.
It
Even
throws
though
you
I
off, right? Yeah.
yeah. So but yeah, I would love to I don't have a top well the only topic is I'm praying for, all my New Yorkers in DC and people with all the in Canada with all the smoke fires
Yeah.
and watching how eerie that looks. So just hope, people are I'm talking to a friend today who lives in DC and he's like,
Mhm.
yeah, we gotta wear a mask. And I'm just like, wow. So just sending a shout out. We stand with for New York. They just be going through it because I think New
They
York is really feeling.
I'm sure they are. They be go I saw something, I think it was a TikTok video of somebody out wearing a mask. It was like a Dyson, like the technology company that makes like vacuum cleaners and, hair dryers and fans. There's a Dyson mask and it looked very much like dystopian type mask that they were wearing on their face to go outside, and they were outside in New York, and it, was supposed to help kind of purify the air. And they were
Mm,
saying that whatever's in the air there wasn't necessarily even the mask that they were wearing wasn't prepared to kind of like filter some of it out. So it was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. So yeah,
that's
shout out
serious.
to
Mm,
folks in
yeah,
New York.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, so the our topic this week is it's interesting because it's one of those topics, or one of those, I would say, like subject matter in conversation, sometimes casually, sometimes formally. Like I was mentioning, specifically like thinking about DEI and the way that diversity and equity and inclusivity have been coming up in conversations in corporate spaces so frequently, and how, I guess, organization leaders, company leaders are doing better, or at least trying to do better, about creating an environment where everyone feels safe, everyone feels comfortable, no one feels like they have to lessen themselves or become something that they're not in order to be acceptable or accepted, I would say, in those environments. And I think when we think about the topic of code switching, there's lots of different things that come to mind when we hear that terminology or we hear that phrase. So I'm curious for you, Kenya, what is the first thing that comes up when you hear the term code switching?
Hmm. First thing that comes up. Well, I liked how you put when will it end because I think that might be one of the first things that pops up in my head of this lack of being able to show up as a whole self. Because essentially, to me, when I hear code switching, that means, I'm sorry, my screen did somewhere, means like cutting off a part of who you are in order to accommodate. That's what I think of accommodation. I think of, like I said, when will this end?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also, though, I was trying to take a little bit of a deeper thought
Mm-hmm.
when you had said, you wanted, for us to discuss this, which I was glad to see. And, I think those of us, and I don't know, you grew up, what was the environment like that you grew up in terms of cultural demographic? Did you say you were like one of very few Black students?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I, from kindergarten through 12th grade, during that period of schooling, I went to five different elementary schools, and then a junior high and a high school. And so, of the five elementary schools that I went to, at four of them, I was one of very few, meaning like less than 10
Mm,
Black people in the entire school. And
mm,
then when I went to junior high and high school, I was still one of a very small, like less than 3% population of Black people at my
mm,
junior high and my high school, where there were easily 1,200 students in my high school. It was huge high school because there was only one school for a big area. So, being very much a minority in predominantly white spaces from an educational standpoint through that, K through 12, those young years, formative years, I didn't realize how much of a minority I was until I was outside of those predominantly white spaces. Like, oh, this is what it's like to be around a lot of Black people. That's fun.
yeah.
But it wasn't my like day to day. No.
Okay. Yeah, ironically, growing up, I think when I tell people I'm from Colorado or from Denver, the assumption, oh, you must have been the only Black person in all your spaces, and it really wasn't like that for me because Denver is always, it's a very progressive city, and so it's always been a little bit ahead of the curve with how they've approached a lot of social stuff. I'll
Mm,
just say social stuff. Denver. Now I'm not saying Colorado because there's Denver and then there's Colorado. Okay, so that's the difference. So when Denver shows up, or when Colorado used to show up as a red state, it was more because of the Colorado stuff, not the Denver. Go Nuggets, go Nuggets. Yeah, I should say that. Nuggets won. They're leading the season or the play the championship. They're
they
not.
are
They
part
didn't
of the
win
W.
win
They
yet,
didn't
but they're
win yet, but they're doing well. That's good.
doing well. But anyway, so most of my spaces were actually quite multi. They were quite diverse.
Mm,
The issue was when I would take, because I was on more of the higher honors, whatever track of classes. That's when I became. So it was inside my classroom, but not in the
mhm,
school and another. So I just I bring that up because with code switching for me, because I had to navigate literally from going to this class to then changing classes and I have a completely different peer group, you know,
mm,
it's socially, and now I'm going to go over here and now it's back to this now. So, and I think in hindsight, I could feel a little bit of a switch and I said, I'm not doing that.
mm.
Like I
You're
could
like, I
feel
won't be doing that.
I, it was like this is not sustainable. Like I
Yeah,
remember, I mean, I wasn't using that language, right? But
of course. Yeah.
I remember feeling like, why do I have to act different in front of my white friends and I have to act different with my Black friends? Like, why do I have to
Mm,
act with this friend when I have to act this way with this friend? And I was attempting to navigate that. And by the time I got to middle school, I remember clearly being like, I'm not doing that. I remember I was like, Black friends, because Black kids would say, oh, you're trying to talk white. And I was just like, what's that even mean? Like, I don't even,
hmm.
I'm like, I'm not changing how I talk. I'm not
Right.
changing, this is how I talk with you. This is how I'm going to talk with, whoever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think because of that, and, and I, even within some family dynamics, when I would visit family um, on the East Coast in
Hmm.
DC with the DC accents and the Maryland accents and so forth. And
Merlin.
so my
Merlin.
Maryland, Maryland,
Yeah. All the yes. Yes. All that. Uh-huh. Yeah.
right. And so my cousins, our family, and
Hmm.
no disrespect, but they would ask, why are you talking white? And I would be like, okay.
I
So
would get
now
that all the time. Yeah. Yeah. So
and I
you,
just,
it's like it's
yeah,
happening for me, and not to cut you off, but like
no, you can.
my experience was similar, where even though my peer group was predominantly white, I was thinking about this, kind of preparing for the conversation. By the time I got to middle school, I will junior high is what we called it, but by the time I got to seventh grade, I just kind of made friends with people who were in my neighborhood. There was, the white girl who lived behind me. There was my friend who lived down the street who was mixed, and then there was the little black boy who lived around the corner, and there was my friend, my Mexican friend who lived down the street. And we walked to school together. We were at the bus stop together. So we were like the Rainbow Coalition,
Right.
and it just happened that way because we were neighbors. Once we got to school, though, once we were on campus, of course, we were divided by our academics, whatever classes we had.
Yeah.
And then, of
Yeah.
course, we were also kind of in our little, what I guess called like affinity groups at school. My experience, though, in my family was similar to what you described, where my dad's side of the family, my dad's, I guess, extended cousin side of the family versus my mom's side of the family, the conversations were very different. And the first time that I actually felt like code switching was affecting my sense of identity was when I was around the black kids at school. It was the
Yeah.
black kids at
Yeah.
school who questioned the way that I dressed, the way that I wore my hair, the way that I talked. And I was bullied. I was called an Oreo. It was the black kids who did
It's
that.
black kids for
It
me
was,
too. Yeah.
yeah. So it was like it affected my sense of identity in a way where I felt like, okay, then I'm just not trying to be around y'all. Then if you're the ones who are asking me to be different, then I'm just going to be kicking it with Becky, Sarah, and Susan because they're not asking me to be different. They're not asking me to be anything else. And so it kind of carried with me into adulthood to a point where there was a point where until I went to an HBCU, I had like two black friends out of my 12 friends. And they were
Mm.
the other one or two other black girls at school who experienced something similar to what I experienced in their little pods.
Mm.
So
Mm.
would you say like what are some of the I don't want to call this a privilege, but I guess like what are some of the benefits of code switching that you've either witnessed or experienced yourself?
Ah, you know, I don't know. I guess a benefit, and I don't know how much I really believe this is a benefit, but I could see how people would be, is that ability to to be in various rooms, to
Mm,
to be in, to have the ability to, if I'm talking to this person who's, whether not even so much culture or race, but just of this
mm-hmm.
level of status or whatever. Because there's code switching, not just within, race, but
Right.
within economics. And, if I'm amongst a group of people who are more fluent, even as all Black people, the way
Mm-hmm.
I show up energetically, the way I communicate, what I talk about, it might be very different than when I go over to Jimmy Joe's on the corner, whatever, and then like,
Right.
and my dialect, just even that, when I said Jimmy Joe's,
Jimmy
everybody
Joe's, right? That's what I'm saying.
knew
It
what I
just,
meant, right? And so the benefit is, being able to rock in any, even though these are two black maybe spaces,
mm-hmm.
because black is very diasporic and it's got a lot of layers to it. I think that, I guess, that could be a benefit if it's used in terms of relation and building connection or building that. But I don't know. I mean, that's kind of, to me, the just having the flexibility within your experiences to be able.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you have to really be clear on your identity.
Right. I
Fully.
agree. I think
Yeah.
it's the ability to code switch or be a social chameleon. I think can be valuable, especially if you are intending to be more relatable. Which it can be tricky too because sometimes it's like, okay, well, if I am talking to Jimmy John versus talking to James Jonathan. Like, do I need to be different? You know what I'm saying? Or do I need to be different for him to feel comfortable or for them to feel like I'm relatable? Or if I'm my same self everywhere I go, whether it's James Jonathan or Jimmy John, like, what does that? Do I need to be different? And it's interesting because it does sometimes, well, for me, it does sometimes feel like it happens in a very subconscious way, almost like I know sometimes when I travel, especially to another country, where if I'm there long enough, I feel like I'm picking up the accent or the like I sound like a whole Guatemalan right now. I this is not, and it's just like it's like a mimicking thing or something that happens.
Right. Yeah, and I think, and so that's just like, oh, is that code switching? Or is that just, like you said,
Is that
relationship?
adapting or something? Yeah, maybe.
Adapting, right, so that you can survive. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's a really good book. Have you read this book? It's old now, but I think it's called Shifting.
Shifting. I'm
Shifting.
familiar, but I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, years and years ago, I got that book, and I'm not. It's a full long title, and it's basically about this whole concept of Black women,
Mhm.
and our continual, constant shift shifts that we make, code switches that we make to the point that we don't even know who we are,
Mhm.
because we, in this environment, and at work we're here, with family we're here, in our social groups we're over there, when we're in,
Right.
and usually doing it in a more sacrificial, like losing kind of a sense of, so now who am I?
Right.
I can show up this way with this person, so now I'm starting to identify only that aspect of
Right.
self, but what is the core self? So I just think it's a huge call, particularly for Black women, to do that soul work, so we know who we are. So you don't feel like, I don't feel like I code switch now in terms of, oh, I'm around these people, I need to make sure I act this way. Like, it's, do you feel like that? Like, do you
I
feel
feel
like
like
you?
it I feel like it's a delicate balance of like maintaining my authenticity without feeling the pressure to conform to different environments or to modify to different environments. Like what you said, you brought up something earlier, which code switching isn't just relevant or relative to race or ethnicity or, being in environments where maybe you're the only woman in an environment predominantly of men. That I think that I experienced code switching was as a queer person in very
Mm,
hetero dominant spaces, especially when I first came out, or even before I came out, where it was, being conscious about not using certain language or pronouns to describe partners, or letting people kind of make assumptions about my romantic relationships because my presentation doesn't necessarily scream like, oh, that's a queer person. So there was
um,
a certain level of code switching that I noticed would happen there, where I think that maintaining authenticity now looks different, and I don't feel it necessary to code switch in order to be accepted in certain, communities or certain environments. But I do see that there is a benefit to that social chameleon component depending on where I'm at. Not in a way that
mhm.
takes away from who I am, but in a way that almost like exposes a part of myself. It's like, oh, this is a space where I can share this part of me,
Yeah.
because this is an affinity space where this part of me is going to really be celebrated. Whereas in another environment, that part of me might not be shared, even though it's still very much a part of who I am.
That's a really good point, because I think about being an artist and
Right.
how much more I can step into Kenya when I'm in my community of artist friends.
Mm.
When I'm with other musicians, when I'm with actors, when I'm with visual artists, dancers, I feel it's an instant, like, like, it's just because I know I can kind of move in this space. And it's not that I'm acting really differently. I don't think that it's so, but there's a home there. So I
Mhm.
think that I open up easier, you know. And I wonder if that's a level of a code switch, in the sense that I release more of myself, in that effort. Whereas when I'm in more formal spaces, or spaces that I know people are not necessarily in the creative kind of vein, I can rock that way too, and so let me, kind of sit more in this space. But there is a breath, there is a ease, there is a, when I'm in spaces of either healing kind of spaces
Mhm.
or working with other healing workers, and versus, yeah, when I'm more an academic, but I've been in them so long now.
Yeah.
I feel pretty comfortable. I think how I'm talking to you right now, I'm pretty comfortable, in that same energy,
Mhm. I
with
agree.
those workers.
Yeah, I think it's like it's like you said, knowing like when you're in an environment with artists or when you're in an environment with other healers or an environment with other, spiritual practitioners, just the ease of exposing or sharing or allowing other facets of who you are to just come out, so to speak, and intermingle and play and dance with other people who are doing that same thing. It feels different than being in academic spaces, or for me being in very corporate spaces where even the topic of conversation is going to be different if I'm on a panel with a bunch of people talking about the future of technology versus being in a women's circle with people talking about next life experiences. It's a different space. So I feel like sometimes when we hear the term code switching, it feels very like rigid and robotic. Like, let me put on
Yeah,
this other
yeah.
face or let me become another person so I can be in this environment, as opposed to, for me, it's more so like, oh, let me access this other part of myself because this part is going to be more connected here than if I'm in another environment. That part of me might not necessarily really thrive, to be honest. It's like it's still very much there. It's still very much part of who I am, but I might not be talking about the woo woo spiritual stuff at the tech conversation. They might not be ready
Right.
for
Yeah, I was gonna,
that.
do you think that that's so, yeah, is that code switching then, or is it, because it's funny, I find, like, so when you were saying, like, in this environment, I might be more of this with this environment, because to me, it's like access to KEISEAN, like,
Hmm.
who gets a certain level of access.
Yeah.
I think when I think of code switching, I'm thinking of accommodation as
Mm.
opposed to, I'm actually creating relationships. You
Hmm.
know, I, code switching to me doesn't equal I'm attempting to build relationships. So I'm opening up myself a certain way, or I'm going to talk about things in a way that you can better understand, or topics that
Right.
builds accessibility of relationship. But code switches, oh, this is this. I don't want them to judge me. I want to make
Mm.
sure, that I'm at their level.
Okay.
And there's even to me a little bit of that whole imposter syndrome situation creeping
Mm.
in to appear that I've got this with this person, or
Right.
I don't know.
I can see that. No, I can see that. And I know I see that. I see that perspective as well, as instead of it being this code, so to speak, exists within me somewhere anyway. And
Mm,
in this particular environment, this is where I can apply that part of myself, versus I have to essentially create something, an accommodation, so that in this environment, I will be perceived in a particular way. I think that's where I can feel the difference for me, is that when I think about code switching in a professional environment, there were times when I felt like, oh, I need to act as if, so to speak, so I can get into this room, or so I can participate in this particular conversation. Versus, I think over time I learned, oh, this is just part of who I am. So I'm not acting as if anymore. This isn't an accommodation that I'm creating. It's more exposing. Yeah, I'm into that too. Kind of like to your point earlier about Black people not being a monolith. So if I'm in an environment and I'm in a predominantly white space and I even express interest in a certain genre of music, it's like, oh, such and such. It's like, yeah, that's very much, yeah, I do. I'm not accommodating you. I'm just telling you I love Dave Matthews Band. You know what I mean? Like,
right,
it's so,
right,
yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's funny because even with me having the name Kenya, like as
Hmm.
soon as I walk in spaces, there's so many assumptions because, oh, your name is Kenya. So either
Mm.
either you're intensely black, or you know what I mean, like you're intensely black because your name is Kenya, or you are Kenyan. Like there's a lot of people that assume because my name is Kenya, I'm Kenyan. And I've
Right.
never really quite understood why you would name your child the name of the country they were born in. But that's, maybe you would. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. Right.
um, so I again, these kind of I have learned to kind of have fun with these expectations of what,
Mm-hmm.
and then this now starts getting a little woo woo.
Just a little woo woo. Okay.
Little woo woo. And you're a Scorpio rising, so you probably have this too.
Okay.
I can read people. Like I can feel,
Yes.
yes. They don't have to open their mouths. They don't, and it doesn't matter. This is not, oh, I can read white people, black people. No, it doesn't matter. Like I
Mm-hmm.
energetically, so I quickly kind of can feel how do I need to
B.
occupy this? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
this based
Mm-hmm.
energetically on what I'm reading, and I'm like, is that code switching, or again, is that just attempting to have
It's
better camaraderie and
yeah,
connection?
and I think of it like any environment where I would feel like I needed to code switch would only be for the purpose of fostering a connection. You know what I mean? Like it's if in an environment where I'm like, I don't give a shit about these people. I ain't trying to relate to these people. I'm not thinking about it. I'm not thinking about sharing any parts of myself, accessing parts of I'm not thinking about any of that. It's like it's like I'm not even here, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think about when we think about it, like even like on an organizational level, I know companies and organizations are trying to think about ways that they can address code switching, or for those who do feel like they have to make accommodations to themselves, they have to change themselves or
Mm-hmm.
alter themselves in order to be accepted or included in their environments. I wonder how organizations or institutions are actually addressing this so that more people feel accepted. And I know, like, when you have, events and things now that, that sometimes they'll have terminology on their advertising, and no ableism and no racism and no this, no that, all these are all the things we're saying no to, so that no one feels like they have to switch in order to be accepted here. I wonder what other ways are communities, or small or large, or organizations small and large, how are they creating spaces where everyone feels like they can show up as their whole selves without having to switch? I don't even know what that looks like.
Yeah, I've never really worked in corporate,
Hmm.
spaces. I've always just been in either health, healthcare technically is a corporation,
Yeah.
but it's not, it's not the traditional sense of corporate. So I've mostly outside of the arts and doing my own kind of healing, work, have been in
Hmm.
education, academic, and academics is very different. I mean,
It's
the
different.
more
Okay.
the more different you can be in a lot of, and so, well, it also depends on the major or
I was going
the
to say like
department.
the specific. Okay. Gotcha.
Mhm. And so I have found, at least in higher education, with all of this, trying, wanting to be these spaces where, diversity, equity, inclusion is a huge thing in higher
Hmm.
ed,
Hmm.
right now. And so I do think I am sensing that people are showing up, and students generationally, they're not even seeing, why can't I just be me? Like, I mean, they're just
Mm,
really kind of like,
okay.
I'm just gonna be me. And so now our whole notion of teaching professionalism,
Hmm.
what does that mean,
Right.
anymore now? And I know one of the things I have to teach is talking about professionalism, and what that means. And
Hmm.
I have had to, and I know I've had to tell some of the faculty, I can't teach this according to these normatives that we've
Right.
had, because this isn't the world we live in now. And these students, to tell them to code switch, accommodate. And it's been very interesting hearing their take on professionalism, because what
Hmm.
I think is professional to them means code switching, accommodating, conformist,
Yep.
discriminatory,
Yep.
inaccessible. So yeah, it's been it's, I don't know, code switch. And I wanted to ask you, kind of
Okay.
maybe to segue us a little bit in talking about Black women specifically.
Hmm.
What do you think that has done to Black women, like to the emotional health, mental health of
Yeah.
Black, especially success Black women who have been in these spaces that
Right.
were
You
so
know, it's I think that, like, in the context of like what you just described, where in certain spaces a black woman might be told that she's unprofessional because of the way she styles her hair or her choice of wardrobe or the way she speaks. And so this black woman creates this accommodation, changes or alters herself so that she can be accepted in a professional environment, so that she can elevate her career, hopefully, so that she can provide for herself and her family. And when she leaves that environment at the end of the day, she has to go through this process of undoing this other person that she's created so that she can be accepted at work. That can be exhausting. It can
Mhm.
be traumatizing. It can be mentally and emotionally draining, because it creates separation between who this woman really is and this persona, or even really like this avatar that she creates and puts on at work. And so when I think about the impact mentally and emotionally, especially if this is happening over years of a person's career, they can potentially feel a sense of disconnection even from their own social circles, because they're, oh well, I'm this person at work, and at work I am interested in things that I really don't care about, but I'm pretending. And then when I get home, I'm looking at myself in the mirror like, who am I really? So I feel like it creates a sense of false identity in a big way when it's something that's been practiced over time. So I think that the impact of that, particularly on black women, has gotten so substantial to the point where we've started to push back. No, I am going to wear my hair natural at work. No, we're not going to have the, even in the military, they've had to change regulations that were so suppressive and oppressive towards black women. So we're seeing shifts now. And I think the only reason why we're seeing those changes is because of the impact that it's had over the, I would say, decades since we started to notice it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. I think also, at least our generation, I know that, to me, Generation X really got caught in a weird mire with this,
Mm-hmm.
because I was, again, talking to a friend of mine. We had a long, long conversation about some things, and talking about like where are Black men in terms of their identity, holding their identities to their degrees,
Mm-hmm.
and then and then and Black women too, and
Mm-hmm.
then when, but we were specifically talking about Black men, tying themselves, their identities so tightly to the degrees attained, so tightly to the status of their careers, so
Mm-hmm.
tightly to the economics now, some financial, privilege in spaces, that now they've become that. So,
Yeah.
I think for women too, as Black women, again, getting caught up in kind of this projected identity
Mm.
that you're having to do to stay in these spaces. And because this is what affords you kind of these financial privileges and
Mm-hmm.
so forth, is that, are we losing a sense of self? And so,
Right.
that's why I created Finding Your Voice, because I just see, I felt like I was just seeing too many people reaching kind of the 50 years of age and hitting the ceilings at work, and hitting kind of like, okay, what more am I going to do here?
Right.
Still not, and not knowing what to do next, because so much time has been so invested only in these professional identities.
Right.
Now, when it's time to dig into the personal self, it's like, I don't even know where to start with that. And so now I'm kind of
Mhm.
locked in, the code switched. Like
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I got stuck. And now I don't know how to, I fallen. I don't know how to get up. Like,
Ex-
how,
yeah. Well, because it's interesting, because I wonder, is that the midlife, crisis, the midlife, existential moment where it's like, okay, I've managed to get myself to this level of material success or career success or, educational success, and now what? Who am I? Especially if, in order for me to get to this particular level of success, I was only able to do so because I created this accommodation, because I created this persona through code switching. Now I'm on this journey of self discovery because I don't know who the fuck I am. I
Yes,
don't know. It's like, yeah.
yes, yes. And a lot of times, yeah, it is because midlife, spiritually at least,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, midlife is the point at which the soul very much recognizes we have probably lived the majority,
Uh-huh.
like what we have going ahead of us. We have the majority of life behind us. So,
Right.
you know, not just, but, you still got a strong, when you hit 50,
Of
you still got
course.
a strong
Yeah.
30, hopefully 30, 40 years, but that's not
Yes.
50 years, like it's not a
Right.
strong for.
Right.
So you're going to feel this internal burn. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I just really, I know for myself, I started because again, as I mentioned, when I was in elementary, middle school, I said, I'm not doing this back and forth
Right.
because that's not who I am. And so, I felt in my 20s the kind of work I was doing. I felt me never accessing the creative me, like
Mm-hmm.
never being able to switch into that, never being able to get in that space.
Right.
And so for me, I felt like my midlife crisis happened in my 30s because that was the time that I just was like, I can't take it anymore. And
Yeah.
that's when I stopped doing, physical therapy. And, I just swung on the whole other pendulum and became full-time artist.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm just now kind of like, okay, now that you've been on two extremes, Kenya, now it's like, okay, I can breathe and kind of get into the me. But I think that, yeah, I think the midlife crisis is very, yes, it all comes to a very interesting storm. And what's happening with the economy right now, and the fact that we're no longer, people are going to be hired based on their creativity,
At this
based
stage,
on.
absolutely. Absolutely. I was watching something the other day. This creator on TikTok, her name is Sinead. I think her last name is pronounced Bovell, but she's a thought leader in tech and futurism and so on. And she was talking about the fact that in today's workforce, or today's labor force, specifically in corporate spaces, that the decisions about which candidate to hire are no longer being made by people. They're being made by artificial intelligence when you apply for a job and so on. When you apply for college, in some cases, that initial application consideration is essentially made by artificial. And so when you get into higher levels of leadership within organizations, that's when they start to make decisions about how
Mhm.
creative are you, who are you, and
Mhm.
how will your unique existence, your unique personality, your authentic self, how will that create value or be of value to this company or this organization? So I think, like, when we think about code switching, when will it end or how will it end? I think a big part of ending this practice is starting with just the awareness and the understanding that it does exist, and also recognizing the toll that it takes on people mentally and emotionally from their
Mhm.
well-being standpoint. I think by starting to recognize the weight of that, then we can hopefully work towards starting to dismantle some of these systems that perpetuate this as a practice, so that we're
Yeah.
not having the midlife who the fuck am I awakening moment. So we're not having that, in your
Right.
30s or your 40s. It's like, maybe we can just start by, like, oh, I know exactly who I am. And who I am is
Right.
acceptable in every place that I go because I can show up and I don't have to switch. I don't have to change.
Right. And really beginning to, I agree, and beginning, I think as Black people,
Hmm.
I mean, and I may get, somebody might throw an egg at the screen at what I'm getting, but, but we have, in my opinion,
Hmm.
kind of what we were just saying, it was the Black people who gave us more
Grief.
of,
Yeah.
right, right. And I think as Black people, we, because of obviously the trauma and because of all of the things, and this has
Mm-hmm.
historically always been the case, and we have to recognize it in its modern space,
Right.
we have to not so quickly assume that this is what's going to happen if I do this because they are going to, I mean, we'll create a whole story
Yes, we
of
will.
what, yes, what will happen based on our trauma. That's really what
Mm-hmm.
it is.
Mm-hmm.
Based on our trauma, it's based on the subconscious that we have tucked away,
Right.
put away in order to function, to survive,
Mm-hmm.
to excel. And to me, for code switching to shift or end, like we can't, and yes, systems have to do things, and we have
Mm-hmm.
a massive responsibility in tapping into the truth of who we are. And
Right.
and that I think is very, it's, while that sounds like kumbaya and yeah, and keep hope alive, that is a very hard thing
Yeah.
for Black people to do, because we have no true understanding of the traditions and rituals, and
Mm.
like we don't have these practices that
Mm-hmm.
really can, the closest we have maybe is church, and church have a lot of,
Yeah.
lot to that. So us being
Yeah.
able to really tap into our truth, I think this is way deeper than maybe we can even. I
I
don't know. I
think,
think it's
yeah,
deeper
no,
than
I
what.
think it is. I last year I heard this person speak during a conference, a virtual conference that I was a part of, and she was talking specifically about many of the challenges or reasons or barriers or obstacles that exist within the Black community, and kind of like reasons why we Black folk don't get our shit together, essentially, is what she was saying. And one of the things that she said, which stood out to me, was one of the reasons that we're not getting our shit together is because we have not collectively healed as a
Absolutely.
collective.
Absolutely.
And while we might be individually healing, we might be individually working on ourselves, we might be individually on these journeys of self acceptance, it hasn't happened as a collective yet. And so I think a big part of that is really understanding how important it is for us to embrace and celebrate the diversity that exists within us as people. Because while we might all be Black, our cultural heritage looks different, our lived experiences look different, our spiritual beliefs look different, our politics look different. Like, we're not all the same. And so I think if we can get to a place where we're able to just honor those differences amongst ourselves, then we can start to feel a little more stabilized or feel a little more authentic when we go into other spaces. It's like, if I know my people got me, I can go in here with these white people and just be myself.
Right.
You know what I'm
Right.
saying? I'm not worried about what they think because I know my people got me too, and I think
Right.
that's a big part of it as well, because like you said, systemically, yes, things need to change. I think like within our community, we need to change as well.
Right. Yeah. And I'll kind of say this, and I know we're getting a little closer to our hour point.
Yeah.
Obviously, if anybody's in the audience that wants to chime in or ask questions or just share their own experience with code switching or thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. But
Right.
one of the things that, when you were just saying that community and as collective, I know when I went to Howard, and I don't know if you felt like this when you went to college,
Mm.
that was also the closest I felt in terms of a collective. Like we were all very, very different at
Mm-hmm.
Howard, coming from all over the world,
Right.
but we were all there on this similar mission
Mm-hmm.
to get our education and to become something that we
Yeah.
believed in. And
Yeah.
one of the cool things I do think, now I'm biased, y'all. Okay, yeah, thank you, I'm biased. But I do think that probably one of the most powerful things about Howard is how much it pushes you to be an individual while being within the collective. Like your
Mm-hmm.
individuality, every class, every social organization or student organization, student group activity, if you didn't show up as you, like
Mhm.
that was something that I had to, that was probably one of my biggest growth factors,
Yeah.
was learning how to be me. And so it was when I left Howard and got into the real world that I
Mhm.
started forgetting Kenya. And so my friends from Howard, it's very interesting. Like Keisha was here, I think,
Mhm.
and she was saying, "Oh no, I thought you were outgoing, but but still kind of quiet." And she, it's like, right, that is who I am, right? And
Yeah.
so, because I really showed up as me, and
Mhm.
you're young also, so there's a certain bliss that kind of comes with the ability to be like, yeah, I'm this or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
But that community, you said healing as a community. I was listening to Boris Kojo actually also talking about that. I was quite
Mhm.
impressed. He's a little fine ass and smart and talking about
And
healing
smart.
as a collective.
Yes. Yes. All of the above. He's checking a lot of boxes.
A lot. Oh, sorry, Nicole.
No, I
Anyway,
agree. I
yeah,
agree.
that's what he was talking about. Is we must heal.
As a collective. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I mean, I'm not necessarily like a huge endorser of Louis Farrakhan, but he says something about
I kind of really like.
I mean, I like some of the things that he says, but he says something to the effect of like, let's get free first as Black people, and then we
Mhm.
can argue about our differences later. Like, let's do that collectively. Let's collectively get free. Let's collectively heal as a first, and then after we get to the other side, we can argue about politics at the cookout. Like, is we can figure that other shit out later, because I think that if we're not willing to just champion our diversity within our culture, within our diaspora as Black people, if we're not willing to advocate for inclusive spaces where queer and trans people are also invited to the cookout and also have a seat at our Black ass table, if we're not willing to challenge some of the norms, quote unquote, that exist within our community, if we're not willing to do those things, then you know what I'm saying? Like we gonna be carrying this code switching burden for a while, if we don't do that.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I'm concerned about that, Keyshawn, to be really honest. I'm
yeah.
concerned, I'm really, especially when you're bringing in kind of, what you, in terms of talking about LGBT. My computer keeps going off.
It's
Okay.
okay.
So in my thing, my thing blacked out. I'm like, oh God, I'm
You're
gone.
still here. Yeah, you're still here. I get
But,
it.
queer voices, and really, I was listening to, there's an artist who
Hmm.
I cannot urge people enough to please listen to this artist. His name is Duran Bernard, and good grief, goodness, he's outstanding, and so he considers himself a queer individual, and he was
Hmm.
being interviewed in an IG live, and when you watch him, go to Tiny Desk, go to NPR Tiny Desk,
Hmm.
put Duran Bernard. I know it's a little different, and when you watch this, you are going to have an experience. Like Tiny Desk
Hmm.
already gives you that,
Yeah.
but because of who he is and
Hmm.
how he exists within his identities,
Hmm.
it's what I love so much. It's like when we used to watch Boy George
Oh
in Culture
yeah.
Club and not feel his appearance, just really love his music. Like it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, he's
Right.
wearing eyeliner and full face of makeup, and yeah,
Right.
whatever. I love Karma Chameleon. Like I mean,
Yeah.
it just is
Yeah.
nothing. And I feel like we've lost the ability to access people. Like they're
Right.
like, and we're getting caught up in like the labels of things.
Hmm.
Granted, because there have been a lot of dismissal and
Of
all kinds
course.
of things. But what was so refreshing hearing him, he kept pushing this idea of, as Black people,
Hmm.
I want you to experience me,
Right.
not necessarily always trying to accept me
Exactly.
or, understand even me. He's like, I don't want you to do that. Just experience, be in relationship with me. Like just
Right.
be present with me. So I think as Black people, our ability to, in all these facets of who we are, to
Hmm.
sit in spaces and do that without judgment.
Yeah.
Yes, we have to do that first. And yes,
Absolutely.
Farrakhan. My dad introduced me to Farrakhan when I was about 14. He was very supportive of Farrakhan, and I actually
Hmm.
really I learned a lot from Farrakhan, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of his I mean, especially when I think of like my son posted something on TikTok, and it was like he's asking a friend a question, and he said, "What is one thing that you think black people need to let go of?" And the friend responded by saying, "The need to be included." And it's like, and he ain't talking about he ain't talking about included amongst ourselves necessarily. He's talking about the need to be included in other spaces. And I feel like
Mhm.
if we can be inclusive amongst ourselves, maybe that need to be included in other spaces will lessen, because we won't be going
Yeah.
into those spaces seeking inclusion, seeking acceptance, especially I know like for queer folks. And I'll say this quickly, for queer black folks, because it is, Pride Month.
Yeah.
When we come out, it's very rare that we're just fully embraced and accepted and included, even in our family communities, in our church communities, in our black communities. So we go outside of our black spaces seeking acceptance and seeking inclusion. And so,
Absolutely.
and sometimes we get lost, and sometimes that's when code switching gets implemented for the sake of survival. So I think if we can start to move towards ending this as a practice for us. I can't speak for the rest of y'all, but for us as black people, as black women, if we can start to be a part of the progression of ending this practice or eliminating it as a necessity to feel included, if we can start doing that by really being champions of diversity and champions of inclusion across the board, across the diaspora of black people, I think that's one step in the right direction. And I think applying that to the LGBTQ plus community is a big part of that.
Yeah. I love it. You just put a nice and period to the to the conversation. And so as we wrap up, I'm gonna let us do our little, our features as we're getting to our hour. But I wanted to say, kind of to that point, it's hard when you've been in spaces where you really haven't felt like yourself, whatever
Right.
that is, whether that's
Right.
within families or that's within work, relationships. I mean, people will be in a whole full marriage.
Ma'am. Say the words and say it twice, okay? It's yeah. A whole full marriage. Yep. Whole married of a whole
And
life.
whole marriage, yes, to not feel who the fuck am I, right?
That's
So,
right. Right.
and I shouldn't say that because then YouTube takes off. You're not supposed to curse. Anyway, but then go get support to
Mm-hmm.
help you really learn more about you and finding communities,
Yeah.
and really be serious about that,
Yeah.
and be committed to finding, the tribe, the community of healers that can help you kind of do that individual work, but also
Right.
that small tribe that you can, just kind of release in. And that may mean changing up, old girlfriends or,
Mm-hmm.
spaces so that you can experience you,
Yeah.
so that, like, to your point, you can show up and we can dismantle the code switching that makes you lose,
Yeah.
who
The
you
code
are.
switching that makes you. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. I like that.
awesome.
I like that a lot.
Anything that you would like, anything that
Um,
you feature in that you want
this will
people to
be,
know
yeah, I'm like, this will be the last week that you hear me talking about this because it's happening now. It started today, actually, it was the first day.
Awesome. Awesome.
And this is the Business of Wellness Summit. It's a free online conference for women of color, women entrepreneurs, and those who are hoping to build profitable and scalable businesses. It started June 8th and it goes through June 11th. And I will be speaking on Sunday, June 11th, on the final day, is the day that I'll be having a live conversation with the host of the summit, Dawn Rivers. Super excited about that, but it's available now. So anybody who wants to tap in, the link to register is in my bio. The link is still active. It's still live. Today was the very first day, so you haven't missed much. And you can go back and you can watch all the women who led conversations today. So some of the conversations are live interviews with the host, and then others are pre-recorded content that's more instructional with PowerPoints and things like that. So it's really, really cool. And I mean, the fact that it's totally free is really awesome. I think it's exciting. So yeah, super happy to be a part of that. So I'll be there on Sunday.
Awesome. Yes, we need to tap in to hear you. That's on Sunday that you're okay.
Yes, on Sunday. Yep.
Awesome. Well, and me too. This is not my last time talking about what I'm going to talk about, but we still have availability, and I'll let's see if I can put this up here. I've got so many cues here. Oh, see, why is that not a ticker? Okay, hold on a minute, guys.
Oh, the health. Oh yeah, when it comes up like on screen versus.
Yeah, when it comes up. So we similarly the summit we are. June 24th is when we're doing, and I'm trying to see if I can make it a ticker, but I don't think I can because I'm talking and doing it at the same time. But at any rate, the Healthy Vagina Monologues, we're still taking registrations. If you use the discount code, the sub-gift 1, we extended the 50% off because we want people to come, but that ends on Sunday, the 11th. We'll end that. So grab that. And again, to the point, next week last week we brought in Dr. Donna, who is an OBGYN doctor who really specializes on menopause and perimenopause. And so we got to have a taste. If you did not watch that, you can go back on KEISEAN or my YouTube live sections and make sure you watch that. Yeah. Very, very good. And she'll be a part of the summit. And next Thursday, you're really in for a treat. I'm bringing in another one of the guest presenters. Her name is Dr. Bry Coleman.
Awesome.
Bry is
this our pleasure doctor? Our pleasure specialist?
No, that's
this later. Okay.
But Dr. Bry, her energy and her knowledge. Oh my gosh, we're gonna have so much fun because she's very enthusiastic, but she specializes. She's a physical therapist that specializes on the pelvic floor.
That's right. Okay.
And yes, and so our bladder, all the Kegelin people be talking about, even your bowel stuff, the pelvic floor is what helps manipulate those things. And so she's gonna talk about. You brought up about having the bladder the size of a pea or
yes.
But she's gonna break that down for you because you do not have a bladder the size of a pea.
Okay.
You actually have the same bladder you've always had. It's your pelvic floor. That a lot of times if it's too tight, it's making, if this is the bladder, it's doing this to it. So it's making every time the bladder gets filled,
it's like
it's hitting. Yes. Whereas we need the pelvic floor to be able to drop so that the bladder. So she's going to explain all that. So she's coming on our special guest next week. And she'll be a part of the summit. So excited to have her and the summit. So make sure y'all register. Okay. And I updated my website, Finding Your Voice After 40. About dang time. Finally. It's updated.
Okay.
So all this stuff is on there finally now.
Everything's on there. Okay.
That was driving me crazy. I'm like, when am I going to do this? But
it's there. That's good.
Any last minute thoughts?
Nothing at the moment. I'm looking forward to hearing from our special guest next week. And hopefully, I hope that today's conversation, at least those who have either experienced code switching or are wondering how they can actually be part of the solution, specifically of, how to end that practice in our community. Hopefully something that was shared can be applied for folks. So I'm thinking, that's the last thing I have to say about that. But this was this is one of those hard topics, but it was a good conversation.
I think it was, I agree. And I think it was an important topic. And I don't feel like I hear anybody really talking about it.
Not much, no.
So I'm glad you shared your stories. We both seem to have very similar elementary.
You do? Yeah, right. Yeah.
School issues. Yeah. But yeah, we'll be back. We'll be back next Thursday, same time.
That's right.
Same place. And hopefully with me not having an eye migraine.
And also hopefully with me not having the whole entire sun blaring into my eyes for 10 minutes.
What happened?
It just because it's moving between the buildings. So it's down behind a building right now. So we have really great light right now. But when it was about here, I was like, I can't see anything either. So hopefully I'm still on camera.
You were.
Okay,
You were.
good.
You just
Great.
looked like you were just glowing. You just
Glowing, like
glowing
I was just about to ascend
glow.
into the sky.
That's what was happening.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that's
Yeah,
funny to
no,
me.
this was
Uh,
great.
yeah, this was fun. So we'll see you guys next week, and you
Bye.
guys take care. All right, bye.